Soundstripe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. This is a show where we take a dip, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, into the archetypes, symbols, mythologies, systems, and implications of whatever movie or TV show I am watching this week. All right, so welcome back to Popcorn Therapy, where we talk about therapy in the context of pop culture and use pop culture as therapy in some cases. And I have a guest with me today, Tracy, who's an old friend of mine, and we're going to be talking about The Little Mermaid, which we both deeply love. Tracy, how would you like to introduce yourself?
I am a writer, editor, that kind of thing, publishing person from Vancouver, Canada, but living in Stockholm, Sweden for quite some time now.
So why don't we start with you? Tell me a bit about your relationship with The Little Mermaid.
I've been obsessed with The Little Mermaid since I was very little. It's the VHS I can remember grabbing every time I wanted to watch a film. I know it by heart. I love all the characters. Prince Eric has always been the best Disney prince in my mind.
Definitely.
Just everything about it really resonated with me as a little girl. The kind of emotional storyline and things as we can get into, but yeah.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I had all the songs memorized and, knew the cadence of the movie kind of by heart. And you and I both have little children. And so we had a conversation, I don't know, maybe years ago, it's maybe a while ago, about rewatching The Little Mermaid with our kids, and I hadn't seen it in many years, and I was kind of expecting to be offended by it, because there are all these criticisms of The Little Mermaid, specifically about this narrative of this woman who gives up her voice in order to find love, in order to be with a man. But I think you and I both kind of discovered in watching it with our children, actually, that's not what this movie is about. That criticism doesn't quite hold up. There's so much more happening in this movie than just that piece, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've kept watching it throughout my life, but definitely more deeply rediscovered it again, showing it to my son, who I managed to hook into it because he likes sharks, and there's one scene with a shark. I realized watching it as an adult, though, why it resonated so much with me, and it was Ariel's relationship with her father. And so it's always kind of irritated me, this dismissal of The Little Mermaid in oh, but it's just a story about a girl giving up her voice for a man and just writing it off. Always kind of bugged me, and I didn't realize why until I watched it again as an adult and was like, this is about Ariel and Triton. Eric is absolutely just a flat character, side character. He's irrelevant. What do we know about Eric? Nothing really. The people who have real depth and emotional journeys are Ariel, Triton, and maybe Ursula. Even her little sidekicks, we know so much better and get so much airtime than Eric. So to me, it's just not at all about her relationship with Eric,
Yeah, I was watching it again yesterday in preparation for this call. And I was really thinking about what you had said a while ago about how the story, one way of looking at the story is that it's really about Ariel and Triton. I mean, I'm assuming everybody listening to this has seen The Little Mermaid. It's such a classic from the 80s, 1989. But I'll just go over the story. I also want to talk about the Hans Christian Andersen story in a bit. I also watched the prequel. There's a prequel. The sequel I kind of couldn't get very far in the sequel. But there's also the live action movie. There are a lot of adaptations of this movie because it was so beloved in the 80s. But in case anyone isn't clear, doesn't really remember the sort of thrust of the story, Ariel is the youngest daughter of King Triton's many, many daughters. And she goes missing one day. She's supposed to be at this concert, but she's off exploring because she's so interested in human artifacts and the human world, and she's sort of exploring that, and she loves to find little pieces from shipwrecks and stuff and kind of wonder about what that world might be. So she gets in trouble with her dad for this, and she continues to go up to the surface. She witnesses Eric on a ship, and then there's a storm, and she ends up rescuing him from drowning and sings to him, and he falls in love with that voice in his kind of half conscious state. So he doesn't really remember her face, but he remembers her voice. So then Ursula, the quote unquote sea witch, comes in and offers Ariel the chance to go and be a human in exchange for her voice. And she goes ahead and agrees to this and has 3 days to get Prince Eric to fall in love with her. And if he doesn't, she returns to be a mermaid, but she also becomes one of Ursula's little creatures at the bottom of the ocean that she just keeps forever. But Ursula also has a sort of a larger plan to get King Triton to trade for Ariel so that she can become the queen of the ocean and have the power that King Triton has. So hijinks ensue and Ariel prevails at the end of this movie and everything is great. But as I was watching this movie, I was really thinking about that relationship between her and King Triton. So in the prequel, I don't know if you've seen the Ariel's Beginnings, it's called. Have you seen that?
No.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but there's some backstory there.
Is there any mention of the mom?
Yes, there is. Yeah. So,
Because, there's some subtext, not having seen the prequel, that maybe she lost her mom to a human or something.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Early in that movie, the mermaids are all hanging out in a lagoon, like at the surface. And Triton has given his wife, Queen Athena is her name, a music box that she loves. And this ship comes by and antagonizes the mermaids, and they all escape except for Queen Athena, who runs back in to try to get the music box. So King Triton then bans music from the land. And this whole story is actually about Ariel trying to change that law so that music can come back into the kingdom. And the music in The Little Mermaid is such an important part of it, absolutely. I think. And one of the main problems, I had a lot of problems with the live action 2023 version, but
Same.
One of the issues I had is that Under the Sea is like one of the best Disney songs I think ever, and just the animation with it, it's all these animals using their bodies to create music, and they're having so much fun with music. And the prequel is all about that. It's like everyone under the sea loves music, and that's kind of what they're doing. And there's this sort of speakeasy scene where even Sebastian is secretly a musician. You know, he's still the king's attaché at this point, but he sneaks away to do his music thing because they all love it so much, but they have to do it secretly because King Triton has banned it due to his grief. And so in the live action version, it's very beautifully animated, but animals aren't really expressing the music. Like, it's just a weird kind of disconnected, like beautiful but soulless. The whole movie is kind of like that.
Absolutely soulless, that movie.
Yeah.
I agree. That was everything fell flat because there's such charisma inherent to all the characters in the animated film. And that was just missing. And so, of course, as someone who loves it, it's take it with a large grain of salt because I can't see it too objectively. But I still felt like it was objectively bad, probably.
So many problems with that movie, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was the soullessness that was really the main issue for me.
So flat. Melissa McCarthy, I think, did Ursula, and she did the best job, I felt.
Yeah,
of capturing
she did a great job.
The character. But everyone else, it was just like these blank-faced, absolutely emotionless.
Yeah, so wooden.
And the voices weren't selling the like feeling of it. So you're like, well, they missed that joke and that joke and that joke. Then maybe they don't have to keep the joke from the original, but sometimes it said nearly the same thing, but just like not funny. And we're like,
not funny. Absolutely.
You're like, well, that was a weird way to play that. So I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah, the animals were also very much in the uncanny valley, I think. There were parts of that movie that were too serious.
Yes.
And, I think The Little Mermaid is very playful, very fun. And I think one of the things that's cool about it, too, is that, I've been sort of rewatching some of these old Disney movies with my kid, just out of curiosity, too. And most of the older ones, the Disney princesses, the female characters, were very, very one-note kind of archetypes, which has its value, but they didn't really have any personality or much motivation. And Ariel, I think, is one of the first ones that's really her own person. And there's so much about her that has nothing to do with Eric. Her love of the human world, her curiosity, her desire to experience things that are outside of the world that she knows, her willingness to break rules and try things even though they're scary. And she's also very brave. She rescues Eric at least twice, I think, in the movie. She's kind of strong in that way. She rescues Flounder, she runs away from the sharks. Like, she's very brave and strong, even though she has a little bit of, like, her energy is kind of born sexy yesterday, but her actions are actually quite powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what really got me as a girl was I really related to Ariel's feeling that like I want more, meaning like I have this really strong intuition that there's a lot more to the world than what I'm seeing and exposed to in my day to day, and I'm just enthusiastically like drawn to it and want to get to it, you know? And then also the journey of like, as an adult, I can see King Triton is trying to protect her. And that's why even now as an adult, I realize, oh, I bet humans killed her mother. And that's why he's
Yeah.
so intense. And now being a parent, seeing like, I can imagine being just as intense towards my kids to keep them safe. You know, the drive to keep your kids safe is like guttural, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I can understand his character more now, but as a girl I could so deeply feel the unfairness, and it felt cruel and
Yeah.
unreasonable. And the scene where he destroys her collection gutted me, and
Yeah.
literally not as a kid but later when I rewatched the film as maybe a teen or younger adult, I had to fast forward that scene because it was too
Mm.
upsetting. I can't
So
handle that
painful.
scene and have to fast forward it. You know, it's just so. And like when you get to the end, it's him who helps her when he realizes, okay, she does, like she should be able to choose her own path and make her own decisions, and it's her who needs to live her life and choose what risks she takes. And he helps her to do that and gives her his blessing at the very, very end when he kind of
Yeah.
smiles and waves and sees her off for her wedding. That just breaks me into tears every time because that journey with her father is so gorgeous, you
Yeah,
know.
and there's a moment too, I can't remember exactly when it happens, but I think when they reconcile towards the end and they have like a hug or a kiss or something between them. And it was in that moment where I was thinking this whole movie could absolutely be the family romance, you know, the story about Ariel and her father, him learning about parenting, her learning about that developmental time in the teen years where we really need to learn how to be who we are outside of who our parents are. That's
Yes.
what that developmental journey is all about during those years. And there's a moment too where, you know, one of the reasons I appreciate Triton so much as kind of a more complex character is after he destroys her collection, she runs off in tears or she's sobbing or whatever. He softens and he turns to Sebastian and he says, am I being too hard on her? Or was I too hard on her? And he has these moments of doubt where you can see that he's trying to protect her from something. And he also doubts himself. He also doesn't have his partner, right, to help him with this. So it's just him caring for these 7 daughters. So there's also in the scene where Ursula kind of finds her moment. She's like, ooh, I can see the vulnerability that Ariel has. Like, I know what my plan is going to be. She's fallen in love with this guy on the surface. It's right after that she shows up and kind of tempts Ariel. So Ariel is broken. She's so upset with her father. And, you know, one of the lines in the song is, bet they don't reprimand their daughters, like up
Yes.
on land. You know, she's sort of craving for this freedom where she can do what she wants outside of Triton's rule. And I was thinking about this thing I heard the other day that I totally agree with is that, you know, I have a son. He's only 3, but I know he's going to be a teenager one day. And this is when drugs and sex and like other things are going to come into the picture, right? And he's going to have to figure out how to navigate those things. And I heard on it was an Instagram reel or something about the best way that you can protect your children from, you know, danger on screens or drugs or whatever it is their self-esteem. It's teaching them that they matter. And I was thinking about that moment where that's why she becomes vulnerable to Ursula. If she'd been able to have a conversation with her father, especially knowing that in the prequel, they used to hang out at the surface all the time. Like that was a pretty normal thing that they did. And then that became outlawed after mom was killed that way. You know, there could have been a middle way where she could have explored that world and she could have been in communication with Triton about it. He could have taught her about safe ways to, you know, explore her interests and things like that. But instead, it's like this hard and fast rule. And so much of the time, that's what children and especially teenagers will just completely ignore. They'll just go their own way, right? And so I think when we're navigating that world of the temptation of dangers online and drugs and things like that, the most protective thing is that my son knows he can talk to me about these things, that knows he's not going to be in trouble if something is scary for him or if he makes a mistake. You know, that's what's going to allow me to still be kind of a part of that process so that I can keep him safe while he's navigating these dangers of the surface, as it were,
There's that
right?
scene when she's talking to him and she's like, but trying to like explain herself. He gives her no chance and he literally goes, not another word. And it's
Yeah.
just one way. I'm the boss. Do what I say. And that is just not a functional way to have a relationship. And I have empathy, as I said, why he would feel so like he can't even go there himself because it's so emotionally tough to think about his daughter being harmed, but that absolutely is not helpful as a parent.
It's a trauma response, right? And I've certainly had those moments with, having a kid during the pandemic, among other things, like having my own sort of traumas in my life and having some pretty severe postpartum anxiety, and it not feeling clear to me when I was actually keeping my son safe and when I was overreacting. And I think that's just a really challenging thing with parenting, because you kind of learn, like, when you have a newborn for the first time, every baby thing has these warnings about, like, children have died using this device or whatever it is. And so you don't really know, like, how to navigate that and what that means. Like, you get this sense that, like, any second your kid could just, like, spontaneously combust if you're not looking at them every second. And even if you are, like, you'll make some mistake. And now, 3 years in, you kind of have a sense of, like, oh, okay, like, I understand how this works and, like, how a little human has some survival instincts already and things like that. And that you don't necessarily have to worry about everything. But every stage he goes through, there are new challenges where we have to look at, like, okay, is this safe? Like, should I be right there while he's doing this? Should I let him play with the older boys without supervision? How far away should I be? Like, we have to keep negotiating, like, what does it mean to allow him to have freedom while he also has safety? And I think that's really challenging for anybody, but especially if you have trauma, if you have the trauma of witnessing, like, Triton, your wife, dying because she went back in wanting something you gave her, like, there's so much guilt that he must feel, or shame, or whatever it is, like unprocessed grief. And so much of that prequel, is, to give it a fair amount of credit, but it's kind of about Ariel teaching Triton to deal with his grief and come back to the joy that's still possible after something like that happens.
Was the prequel written and made after the original?
2008.
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. I wonder, is that backstory something, because Little Mermaid comes from, like, an older story? Is that prequel from something in the original works, or is that something someone just made up do you know?
Yeah, I think it's made up. I think somebody added in what happened with the mom. The Hans Christian Andersen story, which I'll talk about briefly, I'll just tell you the sort of basic plot of that story. So it's very similar to The Little Mermaid up to a point. So there's this Little Mermaid. She's the youngest of 5 daughters, and she is the daughter of the Sea King. There's no mention of the mom. So as far as I know, nobody knows what happened to the mom. It's just only the dad. And this Little Mermaid has a statue of a boy. She draws in her little garden, like, a sun. She's really obsessed with the human world. She always wants her grandmother to tell her the stories of the human world and things like that. And so she makes a deal with the sea witch that it's a very similar deal, but there's an added piece that I find interesting, which is, when you take this potion to give you legs, you will feel excruciating pain of having lost your tail forever, and your feet will bleed, and it will be very painful to be on your feet. In this world, mermaids live 300 years, and then they disappear into sea foam. Humans have a much shorter lifespan, but they have eternal souls that live forever in heaven in the context of this story. And so Ariel is not only interested in the human life, but also the human afterlife. She's interested in having an immortal soul. That's something she really wants to experience. And so she gets her legs, and she goes and she falls in love with the handsome prince. A very similar scene, like, she sees, them celebrating his birthday and the fireworks and all that, and she falls in love with him and becomes a human. There's a point where she actually dresses as a boy in order to spend time with him. And we'll talk about the queerness of this story in a minute. But, she's in love with him. She spends this time with him, and she's mute. She's actually given up her tongue. So she doesn't ever get her voice back. I think it's like her tongue is gone forever. But this prince just treats her as a pet, and he makes her sleep outside his door on the floor at night. And wow. I'm not sure he's in love with this other woman, but he has a marriage to another woman. And in this original story, The Little Mermaid from Hans Christian Andersen, he does marry the other woman. And Ariel's sisters come up with this dagger they got from the sea witch, and they say, if you kill the prince now and spill his blood into the ocean, you can be a mermaid again. But instead of doing that, Ariel kills herself with the dagger and throws herself back into the ocean.
Right.
But then she gets this opportunity to spend 300 years, her original lifespan, doing good deeds for humankind, and then she can become an immortal soul as she's always wanted. So it's kind of a tragic, happy ending from Hans Christian Andersen's perspective. And I actually want to read you something that he said about this story that I thought was really interesting. So he says, "I have not allowed the mermaid's acquiring of an immortal soul to depend upon an alien creature, upon the love of a human being. I'm sure that's wrong. It would depend rather much on chance, wouldn't it? I won't accept this sort of thing in this world. I've permitted my mermaid to follow a more natural, more divine path." So it's very important to him that the prince doesn't love Ariel, that this isn't about her falling in love and getting married. And we'll start sort of leaning into the queer aspect of this narrative. But there is one theory that he actually wrote The Little Mermaid as a love letter to his forbidden gay lover who was getting married to a woman. And his feeling about it was like, I'm devastated, like my love for you is so strong and, I can't be with you. And so I'm going to tell this other story about spirit and all of those other things, like the potential of an immortal soul, because I can't be with you in this life.
Wow, that is amazing to learn.
Yeah.
It's interesting to bring to the context of the animated film that it may not also be so relevant about, like, the point is that she needs to be the one who's loved by Eric, but it would be interesting if some of those other themes were in there. It'd be interesting to make a new film taking more of the Hans Christian Andersen version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That now would be super interesting, more than just doing like a live action and
absolutely
killing all the charisma.
Yeah. Well, and then there's Splash too, which I did another episode about, which was actually made before The Little Mermaid, which is interesting. And it's obviously, it feels so similar. It sort of feels like the grown-up version of The Little Mermaid and kind of getting it more from the human's perspective than the mermaid's perspective, which
I haven't heard
is
of
interesting.
Splash. What is this?
You haven't heard of Splash? Oh, you got to watch it, Tracy.
I will, absolutely. I've got my homework now.
Yeah, you got your homework, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, we've talked about it from the perspective of that aspect of parenting where, that's kind of what's going wrong here. And there's the way that at the beginning, Triton and Sebastian are talking about how she needs constant supervision and she has to be watched all the time. And then at the end, Sebastian has that kind of little joke where he says, "I always say children should be free to make their own choices." And Triton's like, "Oh, is that what you always say?" Because it's flipped for both of them, really, right? And they go and decide to let her be free. So it's beautiful from that perspective, but I think it's also really interesting to look at from a queer or trans perspective. Mermaids are often coded as trans, partly because it's about body, right? It's like, I'm in the wrong body. I want to be in a different body and have this different experience. Like, I crave the experience of being on the other side of what I was born into. And I think the queer aspect of it makes a lot of sense, especially the way that Triton responds, right? Like his fear of her going to the surface. Like, if we take that as a metaphor of the fear many parents have when they don't understand that about, like, I don't want you to have this harder life. I don't want you to be that. Like, I'm terrified of you being queer and looking different, and having a different looking body and things like that. So I'm going to absolutely freak out and try to forbid you from having these desires, right? Which in the episode I did on Splash, I was talking a lot about narratives of desire and how that movie is really, it's the whole impetus of the movie is about the mermaid's desire. It's like her desire for Tom Hanks's character and to be human and all these things, and his desire for her and so on. Like, it's very desire focused. And I think The Little Mermaid is too, because so much of what this story is about is Ariel's desire, not only for Prince Eric, but to have these experiences, maybe to have an immortal soul, if we look at it from the Hans Christian Andersen perspective
that's something
too.
That resonated with me as well, and that I think is really there, is that it's like I feel like she felt she didn't quite belong.
Yeah.
So
Same.
she's looking for belonging. So that also makes a lot of sense. And what you're saying reminded me a lot of, like, Gottmik, the drag queen, talks about how monsters, she really relates to monsters as like queer or trans sort of representation of feeling like a monster in society and stuff, and like monster stories and stuff like that. So, I mean, I don't really think of a mermaid necessarily as a monster, but what you're saying, it totally aligns as well. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think I related in the same way, not necessarily explicitly as queer. I don't think I had any sort of awareness of that as a child, but as different. I think again, maybe not consciously, but I could feel from a pretty young age that I was a little different from the people in my family. There was something about the way Ariel knew herself, that felt very powerful to me. And even to this day, I think that's what I relate about it. Just this sense that like, this isn't all there is. Like, there's got to be more out there. And, I think I relate to it. So it's interesting because I feel like I relate to it as a witch now, where, I'm someone who had to work to be able to embrace my spiritual side, the part of me that is interested in magic and ritual, the part of me that wants to learn about goddesses and pagan rituals and, things like that, as something that, my family was just like, not as intensely as King Triton, but they thought that was stupid, right? They were just like, nah, that's not a thing. Like, that's ridiculous that you would believe in any of that. They're very gentle about it now, like no shade on them, but, just as a teen, especially a teen witch for sure, trying to come into myself in that way and it feeling so different, it feeling so unusual, it feeling like something that people would reject me for.
I was also kind of beat to my own drum kind of a kid, even my mom said from really young I would know like I want you to make puppy dog ears in my hair, and she'd be like, what's that? And I wanted like braids and in loops on the sides, just like random things. I was just so sure of myself with these like odd things. I didn't not fit in a dramatic way, but inside I always felt not quite finding my people, like I didn't quite feel like I fit in my family or in my community. I always had that weird sense of not quite belonging. So I think that really was a piece that resonated for me, and not with like an explicit label where I could say how. But funny, because I mentioned Drag Race already randomly, but I think that's also the audience that gets pulled to that. And with a lot of the things that Ruth says, it's like this feeling of, we all have something lovable about us, and creating this space for people who felt like they didn't fit in and felt like they could see the emperor had no clothes, and these kind of expressions. Like, I think that all kind of comes into play for me.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Ursula for a minute, because Ursula is the sea witch. And I was thinking about the witch perspective, again, watching this movie yesterday, like, she's called the sea witch. And Melissa McCarthy adds a new joke in the new one where Ariel says, "Who are you?" And she says, "Oh, you don't remember your Auntie Ursula?" And Ariel goes, "The sea witch." Melissa McCarthy is like, "What?" But I think it's just this. I've been doing a lot of research for my recent book on divine feminine figures and divine feminine archetypes, about the demonizing of witches, essentially, like that witches would be usually women who had their own access to power that was often very land-based and nature-based, and that this was something that threatened the Christian authorities at the time. So they would be demonized and said, like, they're, baby eaters and child killers, and, they have sex with the devil, and they're these evil people and all these things. And Ursula, she's got her red lipstick, and she's very sensuous. Like, there's something very physical about her. She's also the only octopus. Like, they're all mermaids, but she's the octopus. Like, she's different, right, from the rest of them. But yet, I think she's Triton's sister.
But that's interesting too, because if Ariel feels different, like she doesn't belong, like someone who literally was different, like with the octopus legs, was just completely outcast. So it gives like a literal...
Absolutely exiled.
But Ursula, I think, is by far the best, like, villain, and she's one of the best characters in the show, despite being the villain. Like, you love her as much as you should, even though you want to see her go down in the end so that Ariel is saved. She's so amazing, and I think there's a lot of problematic bits too, but it's also great. Like, for me, that sort of fat representation was positive and negative. Negative in that, why are the bad guys in that era always fat?
Yeah.
But like you said, she was sexy. But then also, why is fat only okay when it's sexualized? So there's like good, bad to each of these things.
Yeah.
But also the fact that she was like glamorous and felt sexy and was this like voluptuous octopus lady was just so compelling, if not for it being like a very fresh thing.
And also, she's fully capable of appearing different. She
Yeah.
could be. She has a lot of magical abilities. And, she comes on land as Vanessa, this very beautiful, thin young woman. But she chooses to look how she looks. And I mean, maybe she is a mermaid and chose to look like an octopus. Maybe that's why she's different, is she just likes the tentacles,
Yeah.
more than she wants the tail. Like maybe that's just a choice that she made. But I think it's also interesting to think like she's absolutely the only fat character in this show. Everyone else is very
Except
fit. Well,
when
actually,
she like
Carlotta.
fixed when she does her song and it's like the skinny merman who wants to be muscly and the
Yeah.
fat mermaid who wants to be skinny. She makes
Yeah.
them like conventionally hot,
Yeah.
That is like
She fixes their bodies.
that's another like problematic, like, ooh, that wasn't great to see as a small
Yeah.
girl. But
Yeah. And at the
yes.
same time, I think in some of these witch narratives that I've been working with, especially when I'm thinking about the crones, Baba Yaga, the Witch of the Woods, and the Kaliak, the old woman Winter and stuff, their ugliness is a part of their power, right? Because they don't have to follow the male gaze. There's sort of a widowhood narrative that comes up with these crone characters a lot of the time where because they're not married, they're not defined by a man, so they can have their power sort of in their own way. And the fact that they're not conventionally beautiful means that they don't have to follow the rules that the conventionally beautiful people have to follow. So I think we could also look at that. I mean, it's maybe giving the movie too much credit, but if we look at that scene where she's showing the skinny merman and the fat mermaid and making their bodies like quote unquote correct, that's a bit of a satire on it, right? Because I think she knows like very well. I think you get a clear sense of like, she has this whole thing about how, oh, you don't need your voice, like don't underestimate the power of body language and all this stuff. But I feel like there's this tongue-in-cheekness of the superficiality of what men care about is just what your body looks like. They're not going to care what you have to say. And as a witch, as a crone character, as someone who has all of this power and can change the way things look on a dime, she understands more than the rest of them what that superficiality means.
Yeah, the power that she manages to bring to that character. All of it for me, I continues to convince me that this narrative of Ariel being disempowered, I don't buy that. Like that's such an oversimplification.
Yeah, so I think, some of the things that were interesting about the live action version, I feel like there was a lot of that movie that was trying to apologize for the original Little Mermaid, like shifting and changing certain scenes to make them less problematic. From the perspective of those criticisms. I was rewatching the Kiss the Girl scene, and it does not feel non-consensual to me at all. Like,
No.
they're kind of hanging out, they're feeling each other, they're not talking, but you can see their body language. Speaking of Ursula and her body language, you can see the way they are communicating, right? And Eric is very much not being aggressive in that moment, and neither is Ariel. Like, they kind of lean in, they lean back. Like, there's a lot of, like, I'm not sure what's okay here. We can't talk about it, so let's just see what feels right. And they actually don't kiss in that scene, right? They were about to, and then the eels flip them over. And so the live action movie decided to change this movie and make it more like, they were like, okay, we can't tell Ariel that we're going to do this song to try to convince Eric to I don't know. There was just, they were sort of trying to overthink, I think, like what was going on in that scene.
It can feel kind of performative.
And there were just a lot of moments that felt like, they were sort of trying to correct. I mean, fair enough that everyone in 1989 is white. Like everyone has light skin, I think, pretty much. Ursula's blue, but everyone else is like pale white.
Grayish purple. She's like,
yeah. And so they're doing this weird thing where they're having a lot of diverse casting, which is fine. But then Sebastian has this weird, like this Jamaican, it's a Jamaican accent, but it's like, it feels like it's making fun of a Jamaican accent. Like it feels like that to me. There are a couple of other Jamaican accents in the movie that don't feel as like minstrel-y. And it's Daveed Diggs, and I don't know what his sort of thought process was around it, but the Sebastian in the animated film, it's not Jamaican. He has some sort of accent. I'm not really sure what it is, but I never feel like he's making fun of a certain group of people with that accent. And I mean, I might be missing something as a white woman, of course, watching this, but I feel like there are a lot of weird ways that they're trying to like correct for the racial issues, but then they actually make them worse.
yeah, I feel
And
there's
like,
really successful ways to do that, like Bridgerton. Or I've
yeah,
just been watching this series called Decameron. That's also really interesting how the characters are like the actors are obviously from all different countries because even they have all different accents too.
yeah,
You know, never mind that there's a level of diversity, but So I feel like there's ways that you can play with that more successfully, you know?
Yeah, and it seemed, just I was rewatching some of it. I didn't make it through the whole thing yesterday, but they sort of so I feel like it's always interesting because in fictional stories, you're in a fictional universe. And a lot of the time you get like the criticism with Bridgerton was, well, this isn't historically accurate. Everyone should be white. And it's like, well, this is a fictional story. Like, who says it has to be historically accurate? Historically accurate to what? Right?
Yeah.
Like you can make it whatever universe you want to make it. And so I don't know like what year, The Little Mermaid 1989 would have been set. It wasn't 1989, like they're, smoking pipes and all that kind of stuff. But you don't get a really clear sense of like where they are in the world. And I think that the live action 2023 film does try to situate them a bit. But the best thing I can see is like this is colonial Jamaica. Like this is like British people, white British people, and then their Jamaican servants. And then you're like, what? Like you're bringing in this kind of colonial thing, but you're not going to comment on that and you're not going to problematize that in any way. So it's just kind of this fun, cool calypso, like we're in Jamaica, but it's colonial. I don't know. I thought that was really like, you're not hitting the right note here, Yeah, like I think they were trying to add more depth to Eric's character, and like his whole thing is, we need to expand the kingdom and we need to meet other lands. And he had this sort of, this idea of like, I want to get to know other peoples, and that can include the mermaid peoples, I guess, which is fine. But from that colonial perspective, you're like, okay, so you want to take over more lands? Like, is that what you're doing? Like, that's not better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't get through it. So it's hard for me to go even. Just like, it was just so flat.
Yeah.
That so much of it got lost on me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Even my 3-year-old is just like, what is this? Like, why are we watching this?
Yeah. And especially when you take something that someone knows so well and is such a favorite, and like there were like things, oh, but the Ariel didn't look like that or whatever. I'm like, absolutely no problem with those kinds of changes. That's not at all. That could be a great choice to make, but it was just the acting and the actual story and how they did it was just.
It was very flat, very soulless.
Yes.
Very wooden. Yeah, I mean, I think choosing a black Ariel is great. Like, sure,
Me
absolutely,
too.
let's diversify this.
Yeah.
But let's choose an actor, not a.
Yeah, singer.
I mean, her singing was great. Like, I will say, her singing was beautiful. Like, she did a really good job.
Apparently, Lin-Manuel Miranda, thank you.
Yeah.
Apparently, he was also obsessed with Little Mermaid as a kid and saw it in theater multiple times, and he did the music for the live action.
Yeah.
I was really excited, like, oh, someone else who treasured the original so much is gonna. So that's why I was.
Oh, there was the
so
rap
disappointed
by
when I saw it.
Aquafina as Scuttle. Did you get that far?
No, but
Oh,
Scuttle made me so sad because the whole spirit of Scuttle was just gone. Like Scuttle was
gone.
like
And I love
silly and
Aquafina.
goofy.
Like Aquafina is one of my favorites, but in this movie, it was cringe. It was all cringe. And like I know Aquafina has a rap background. I haven't really heard any of her rap music. She's been criticized in some ways as putting on kind of a black accent sort of thing, which I haven't experienced. Like I'm sort of getting to know her as she's coming into her acting career. But as Scuttle, it was just awful. And like there is a scene where it's when Scuttle finds out, he hears that the prince is getting engaged, but to this other woman. So it's this song about scuttlebutt, and it's just, oh, I'm not going to try. Like, it was just so awful. Like, it definitely felt like somebody who really doesn't know how to rap. And I don't know what her previous rapping career was like, if this was in any way similar, but it was just awful to witness. Like, it was adding this song that didn't need to be there. There are a few songs that were added that didn't really need to be there, but that was the worst one. And the one of those, moments of just like, okay, you're trying to make the racial issues better, but you're making them so much worse. Yeah. So yeah, you could try to finish it to see how much worse it gets.
I'm not familiar with Aquafina also, so I'm gonna have to look her up as well.
She's a ubiquitous now. Like she does a lot of voice acting, and she's been in a lot of comedies lately. And I think she's very interesting, actually. I'm a big fan of hers, but she's got some problematic issues, I guess, as well. That I personally haven't had those problems with her except in this movie. And I'm not sure that was her choice to like awkwardly rap as a seagull.
Coincidentally, I will be going to Copenhagen for the first time for my birthday in a few weeks, where I can see the Little Mermaid statue and potentially visit, I believe Hans Christian Andersen's grave is in a graveyard near where we'll be staying.
Wow.
So
yeah. I
That's
didn't
good.
know until I was researching this that Hans Christian Andersen was gay. And I think it really validates that queer, because I've sort of seen that, aspect in The Little Mermaid of thinking of her as transcoded. But now that I know that some people think that this was actually a story about his grief from having lost his gay lover to conventional marriage, because that's what it had to be at the time, I guess, it makes so much more sense.
Yeah, that story just makes me love The Little Mermaid even more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
even though it's
yeah.
obviously heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, those of you listening, if you haven't seen it in a while, go rewatch it. Think about all these things, and it's a whole different movie when you look at it, I think, from these perspectives.
And yeah,
Yeah, the prequel you might not want to bother. If you're really super fan, you could watch the prequel, but
I need to
it's
see it
cute.
now.
It's good to watch with a kid. As an adult, it's probably like nah. But I think my kid liked it all right. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tracy, for joining me to obsess about The Little Mermaid, which we both deeply love. And that love remains even 40 years later.
Yeah,
It is almost 40 years later.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Thanks for inviting me to come. I was excited to chat about it. Bye.
So I loved that conversation that I had with Tracy, a fellow lover of The Little Mermaid. And I just want to acknowledge that, I think we acknowledged this in the conversation, but there are different problematic places that we can look at this film. Its adaptations and its prequels and all of those things. And even the Hans Christian Andersen original story, which, has this queer narrative sort of embedded within it. And it also has this Christian narrative embedded within it around, wanting to be a part of heaven and that sort of being what that is. And so I think there are a lot of ways to look at this. And just after we finished the recording, Tracy and I were talking a little bit about how, when we lose our ability to think critically, we kind of lose all of these texts, right? And if we can keep our ability to think critically, then we can have the opportunity to look back at these texts and think about how they intersect with each other and what they might have meant at the time. The context in the 1980s was different than it is in 2023 when the live action film was made as this kind of apology to all of the quote unquote problems from the film before, even though some of those problems I think they actually managed to make worse. And other people might have different opinions about that than me. So please feel free to comment and add your thoughts if you have more, especially about the live action one. And so I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Please feel free to be in touch with me. You can follow me at Popcorn Therapy on TikTok. You can find me on Instagram at Julie Peters Wellness. You can go to my website, juliepeters.ca. You can do tarot and counseling with me online from anywhere, as long as I have space, of course, via the Wellness Clinic, which is here in Edmonton, where I practice. And I would love to hear from you. Please follow, this podcast and share it with your friends and so on, your fellow lovers or haters of The Little Mermaid, and let me know what you think.